Welcome to Measuring Up, Thinking Out Loud, featuring news and information from Testo, your consultative resource for precision measurement technology and digital solutions, serving the pharmaceutical, industrial, and allied industries worldwide.
This is Bill White again with Jim Bacon. Jim, welcome back to the Testo Network. We're glad to have you and share your insights.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I'm glad to be here.
Jim, you've talked about the concept of core team concept with respect to the cold chain, the logistics. Could you expound on that somewhat? You've given presentations on this throughout the years. It's important that we make sure we understand that.
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. The idea of a core team approach really started to surface early in my career when we started to work on cold chain processes. And really, it was a collaboration with a number of our partner suppliers. And we came up with this idea of having a strong internal group of people working with a very strong external number of suppliers. And because of the complexity of the cold chain, it became apparent and critically important that all of these different characters and representatives work in unison and collaborate and coordinate to develop a clear set of roles and responsibilities for the cold chain. So really, what we strive for was trying to leverage all of the knowledge and experience of those external providers and leverage that against the knowledge and desires and needs of our internal stakeholders.
Sure. You've got people on the inside, people on the outside. How do you define the difference between a vendor and a partner?
Yeah, that's a great question because, I came up with this idea of, supplier or strategic partner, and the word vendor is used a lot in the industry, not just our industry, but a number of industries. And to me, it points to a very transactional type of relationship, one that can start or stop in an instant and really takes out any personalities, where I believe the idea of a partner supplier incorporates the competency of the people that work with the suppliers, or that are part of the suppliers, I should say. Really, at the end of the day, you're hiring a supplier for their technical know-how, but you have to be able to work with them. And so understanding a supplier personnel that you're working with really adds that trust factor in.
That makes sense. You certainly have a criteria that you've used over the years to measure the potential benefit of working with someone. Can you tell us about how that developed?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things. What we decided early on was to create an internal process, because it was important to understand where we're coming from so that we could collectively, as an organization, determine what we need and to be able to assess it. So we wanted to ensure that we included people inside the organization that were a representation of all of the requirements that a cold chain solution required. So from, logistics and procurement, those are kind of the easy ones. How do we get it from point A to point B? What's it going to cost? But then from a quality perspective, are we looking at temperature criteria from a regulatory point of view, or we want to make sure that we're staying within the guidelines of the regulatory agencies around the globe? From a validation point of view, is the solution that we're looking at from a provider, is it qualified to do what it says it's going to do? And then from a risk management point of view, do we have the proper assessment in place from a financial point of view to identify any potential risks in execution?
Okay, we're with Jim Bacon. Jim is the founder of Stay Cool Logistical Consulting. Jim, how do people know where to find you, and how does that process work?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Bill. They can look me up by my profile, Jim Bacon. It's a rather low-key approach that I've taken. I've created the organization or the company, Stay Cool Logistics Consulting. And so I don't necessarily have a page for that, but I talk about the capabilities of what I can support and provide on my profile on LinkedIn. If you're interested, I can open up some communication with potential parties and start from there.
Thanks, Jim. Your entire career appears to be related to pharmaceutical integrity and getting high value materials from point A to point B safely and with the parameters. They have the documentation required to assure the safety of the public overall. Jim, how do you instill ownership at every step of the way? There are a lot of people involved in this chain, from the producer to the people that are going to be actually using these products, and a lot of different disciplines. How do you keep everybody on the same page?
Well, what we did early on, as we developed the core team, we also developed the structure of a shared business review. And what I mean there is that we not only had business reviews with the individual suppliers, we had a quarterly business review with all of the suppliers. And so we invited them all to the table at the same time. And what this tended to do was, number one, it introduced all the suppliers to each other so they could benefit from the knowledge of knowing each other. We describe those relationships as arms of our supply chain. So in essence, there was a responsibility to provide services for the proper transport of those products. And through a process that we called the mock shipment trial, we mapped out particular lanes that we wanted to create. And then we engaged with each of the suppliers to see how the cold chain worked, each of the particular links. And so there was a number of handoffs. We wanted these suppliers to understand who they were handing off to, when the accountability transferred from one supplier to another, and what each one of them would do to ensure that the product remained intact and that they were supporting the positive outcome of that shipment.
Jim, we're all much more sensitive to the concept of cold chain in our post-COVID years here. At least I hope we're in the post-COVID years. But the idea of success, I think, was expressed nicely in many cases during the early parts of this decade, where we had to get these pharmaceuticals to the end user. Were we successful with that, Jim, in your opinion?
I think so. I think that, the pandemic and the ultimate response of providing life-saving vaccines to patients around the globe. Unfortunately, it happened later than we wanted it to, because a lot of people perished along the way. But it was, the development of these vaccines happened at lightning speed, right? And what made it really, truly successful was when we rolled it out. There was a real coordinated effort. And, where I was involved in this process, we spoke to and engaged with partner providers and clients as well to execute this core chain concept. So, number one in the success area is communication. You can never have too much communication. We've developed best practices along the way. So benchmarking, the particular process against best practices was absolutely key. Mapping out the process and agreeing to it, engaging in the mock shipment trial that I mentioned earlier was a definite success factor. And, creating those clearly defined roles and responsibilities creates a win-win situation for everyone.
You're listening to Measuring Up, Thinking Out Loud, news and information from Testo.
Jim, as a consultant, your business is to see the big picture, and you see it from many different points of view, working with many different companies and interests, those producers as well as shippers and people in the air and on the land and elsewhere. And how do you think we're doing? Are we ready for the next one?
Well, the unfortunate thing is, I think, complacency always sets in after some kind of disaster or pandemic. And so we've seen ups and downs in the whole process over the last 20 or 30 years. it's really rely heavily on the regulatory agencies because they're kind of the gatekeepers, if you will, where they see what went wrong and what went right in terms of execution. There's a lot of companies out there that are not paying it complete attention. So I would say that we haven't hit a valley at this point, but we certainly need to ensure that a lot of the things that we did in terms of collaboration and communication, remain in place. The whole idea of established communication and escalation channels is absolutely key. And that's really the concept behind the whole core team process, is to ensure that kind of higher level engagement. And that's where the creation of these strategic partnerships, as opposed to these transactional vendor types of relationships, is really key.
Jim, you've certainly made tremendous contributions to the industry in terms of best practices, what to do, what not to do, how to build these teams. Does your work extend to the international market as well?
Yeah, absolutely. When in my earlier in my career, when I was working in the commercial sector of biopharma and pharmaceuticals, my responsibilities were in fact international, and so I had responsibility. Even though I had a role here in the United States, I was responsible for our business in Canada, and then I was responsible for our business in Europe from a logistics point of view. I also had responsibilities for trade compliance and international logistics globally for the organization I was working for. So, when I speak about these relationships with suppliers, I'm not only talking about, domestic solution providers, I'm talking about international ones as well.
Jim, do we have the technology that we need right now to put these best practices into place and to give the continuity of service that the industry demands and that the public expects?
Bill, absolutely we do, Bill, but there has to be a will, from the organizations to put these things into place. And so this is where I spoke earlier about complacency. You need to have this structure in place at all times. So it's there when you least expect it, but most need it. So you continue to develop those relationships with suppliers. And this is where the trust and competency comes into play, because you have the trustworthiness with your supplier. You're working with them. They have the ability and the willingness to deliver to your expectations. And then on the other side, from a competency perspective, these organizations are continually looking at innovative ways to improve the process.
Jim Bacon, the last time we talked, I asked you the same question. What's next in this industry as far as compliance, safety, best practices for getting critical products from point A to point B? What's next?
Well, Bill, there's a lot of talk about AI, right? And so there's a lot of that goes on in the cold chain today. There's this whole idea about digital twins so that you can create a process and map out a solution and test all of the weak links and risk spots to ensure that you've answered all of those potential risk areas. But, I think that when you think about the cold chain and the success, you really have to talk and think about or engage in the whole idea behind risk, because there's different risks in the process: financial risk, strategic risks. There's the hazardous risks of the product itself, and there's operational risks. So using AI, we can engage in what we refer to as predictive analytics. And we've seen a lot of that in some of the companies today with their tracking devices, whether they're real time, Bluetooth or software as a service. And this is an area that I think continues to develop and expand and respond to these critical points.
That's great insight, Jim. I really look forward. We've talked before, we're talking now, and I hope we talk again next time on the Testo Network about AI and how it's what we're learning as it evolves. It's just it's fascinating, but it's not everything, and we're going to learn a lot along the way. I assume you'll agree with that.
Absolutely, Bill. It's interesting that you talk in mentioning that, because at the end of the day as well, data is critical, right? And so, being able to collect and assess data, whether it's manually or electronically or potentially through AI, is going to be it's one of the big challenges. And ensuring that continuity is critical as well. Last week, I was looking at a blog on the Testo North America site, and they talked about, data storage ownership. And here, they really dove into a number of areas about who owns the data. So, the manufacturer ultimately owns the data, but the supplier, and in this case, Testo, adopts best practices as they develop solutions. When they're partnering with the client, they want to be able to demonstrate that they have the audit-proof capabilities and proper service agreements in place to create that continuity. I think that's where AI is going to have its biggest advancements, is because you're going to be able to predict, potentially based on what we would call machine learning, identified situations that have happened in the past, with known responses that work. And this is where organizations will be able to develop that strong compliance.
Jim Bacon, Stay Cool Logistics and Consulting. Jim, once again, thank you so much for your time. And we're going to talk again. There's just too much here to explore. And the industry is evolving so quickly, and much of it due to you. So we appreciate your time.
Well, hey, I appreciate the time today, Bill. And what I really enjoy and have always enjoyed is sharing a lot of my experiences, because I feel that, I learned a lot along the way. If I can just share a small portion of what I've been able to experience, it really improves the acumen of people in this market space.
Clearly, you are an asset to the entire industry, and we appreciate it. Thank you, Jim Bacon. We'll talk again soon.
You bet. Thanks, Bill.
You've been listening to Measuring Up, Thinking Out Loud, news and information from Testo, your resource for precision measurement technology and digital solutions for pharmaceutical, industrial, and allied industries worldwide.